Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to find that half the world has simply vanished. Empty cars crash into buildings, planes fall from the sky with no pilots, and children disappear from their beds while their clothes remain behind. In hospitals, patients lie alone as their doctors and nurses have mysteriously disappeared, leaving only wedding rings and watches scattered on empty floors. This isn't science fiction or a movie plot. What if tomorrow became the day that changed everything forever? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. 2,000 years ago, a man named Paul wrote a letter that would become one of Christianity's most debated prophecies. He spoke of a day when believers would be caught up in the clouds to meet Jesus in the air. Most people think this is just ancient mythology, but what if Paul was describing a real event that could happen at any moment? Chapter 1. The Promise in the Clouds. In a small prison cell in Rome, the Apostle Paul picked up his pen to write words that would echo through history. The year was around 50 AD, and Paul had received a vision that shook him to his core. He wrote to believers in Thessalonica about something incredible, a day when the Lord himself would come down from heaven with a shout. Paul's words were crystal clear. He said that when Jesus returns, the dead who believed in him would rise first. Then those who are still alive would be caught up together with them in the clouds. In one moment, in the blink of an eye, millions of people would simply disappear from Earth. The early Christians who read Paul's letter didn't think this was symbolic. They believed it would really happen. They watched the skies and listened for the trumpet blast that Paul described. Some sold their possessions because they thought Jesus might return any day. But Paul wasn't the only one who spoke about this event. Jesus himself had told his disciples that he would come back to take them to his Father's house. He said it would happen suddenly, like a thief in the night. No one would know the exact day or hour. For 2,000 years, Christians have called this event the Rapture. The word comes from a Latin term meaning to be carried away or snatched up. Throughout history, believers have scanned the headlines looking for signs. They've watched wars and earthquakes, wondering if these might be the birth pains Jesus talked about. Today, millions of people around the world believe the rapture could happen at any moment. They think all the signs are in place. The nation of Israel was reborn in 1948. Technology allows the whole world to see events happening in real time. Wars and natural disasters seem to be increasing. Many believers think we're living in the last days. But here's the question that keeps pastors awake at night. What would really happen if the rapture occurred tomorrow? Chapter 2. The Great Disappearance. According to the Bible, the rapture won't be quiet or hidden. Paul wrote that it will begin with the voice of an archangel and the trumpet of God. The sound will be heard around the world, though many people might not understand what it means. First, something amazing will happen in cemeteries everywhere. Graves of believers who died over the past 2,000 years will suddenly burst open. But these won't be zombies or walking corpses. The Bible says these people will receive perfect, glorified bodies that can never get sick, hurt, or die. Then, in the same instant, every living person who truly believes in Jesus will feel their body change. Paul wrote that this transformation happens faster than you can blink. Their physical bodies will become like Jesus' body after he rose from the dead. They'll be able to pass through walls and travel at the speed of thought. Picture this happening everywhere at once. A pastor in Texas disappears mid-sermon, leaving only his clothes behind. A missionary in Africa vanishes while teaching children, her Bible falling to the ground. A grandmother in China disappears while praying in her secret house church. A teenager in Brazil disappears while texting his friends about Jesus. The Bible says these people will meet Jesus in the air, somewhere in the clouds above Earth. They won't need airplanes or rockets. Their new bodies will simply rise up through the atmosphere. Imagine millions of people suddenly appearing in the sky, more beautiful and radiant than anything human eyes have ever seen. But down on Earth, chaos erupts instantly. Cars crash because their drivers have vanished. Airplanes fall from the sky because their pilots are gone. In hospitals, patients are left alone because Christian doctors and nurses have disappeared. Children cry in empty houses where their parents stood just seconds before. The world will know immediately that something supernatural has happened. This won't be something that can be explained away or covered up. The evidence will be everywhere: empty clothes, abandoned cars, and millions of missing people. Chapter 3. The moment everything changes. It's 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. The exact time doesn't matter, because when it happens, everyone will remember exactly where they were. In New York City, a businesswoman steps into an elevator. When the doors open on the next floor, only her purse and high heels remain inside. In London, a father pushes his daughter on a swing in the park. Suddenly, the swing goes empty, and only a small dress flutters in the wind. The father spins around, calling her name, but she's simply gone. Other parents rush over to help search, but they can't find any trace of the little girl. In Los Angeles, a surgeon performing heart surgery suddenly vanishes, leaving his patient on the operating table. The nurses stare in shock at the empty scrubs and surgical mask that fell to the floor. Alarms begin blaring throughout the hospital as more medical staff disappear from their posts. On highways around the world, driverless cars slam into barriers and roll into ditches. A massive pileup occurs on Interstate 95 as dozens of vehicles crash at once. Emergency responders race to the scene, but many of them have also disappeared. Fire trucks sit abandoned on the side of the road, their lights still flashing. In the sky above Chicago, Flight 447 begins its descent into O'Hare Airport. But in the cockpit, both pilots have vanished. The co-pilot's voice crackles over the radio one last time before going silent. Air traffic controllers watch in horror as the plane's radar signal disappears from their screens. The first reports flood into news stations within minutes. Mass disappearances reported worldwide. But the news anchors themselves are disappearing live on television. In Atlanta, a CNN reporter simply vanishes while delivering breaking news. His microphone clatters to the ground as the camera keeps rolling. Social media explodes with videos and photos. People post pictures of empty clothes in shopping malls and abandoned cars in parking lots. The hashtag missing people begins trending globally. But the internet itself starts to slow down as key technicians and server operators have disappeared. Within the first hour, it becomes clear that this isn't a normal disaster. The people who vanished seem to have one thing in common. They were Christians. Chapter 4. Left Behind, Awakening. As the sun sets on this terrible day, those who remain begin to grasp the full scope of what has happened. In homes across America, family members search frantically for loved ones who were there just hours before. They call hospitals and police stations, but the phone lines are jammed. Sarah Martinez sits in her kitchen in Phoenix, staring at her husband's coffee cup, still warm on the table. His wallet and keys are exactly where he left them. His favorite chair still holds the impression of his body. But David is gone, and Sarah knows in her heart that he's never coming back. At Calvary Baptist Church in Atlanta, the evening service was supposed to start in an hour, but Pastor Johnson has disappeared, along with most of the choir and half the congregation. The few remaining members gather in the empty sanctuary, looking around at the scattered Bibles and abandoned purses. Dr. Emily Chen, a psychiatrist in San Francisco, tries to make sense of what she's seeing. Her waiting room is full of people having complete mental breakdowns. They're all telling the same impossible story. Their Christian family members have simply vanished into thin air. The first attempts at logical explanation begin. News reports suggest mass hallucinations or coordinated disappearances. Government officials speak of possible terrorist attacks or alien abductions. But these theories fall apart when the evidence is examined. There are no bodies, no ransom demands, and no scientific explanation for how millions of people could disappear simultaneously. In Vatican City, Pope Francis calls an emergency meeting. Cardinals and bishops gather in the Sistine Chapel, but several seats are empty. Some of the church's most faithful leaders have disappeared. The Pope's face is pale as he realizes what this might mean for everything they thought they knew about theology. Rabbi Michael Goldman sits in his study in Jerusalem, surrounded by ancient texts. He's been getting calls from around the world. Jewish believers in Jesus, known as Messianic Jews, have disappeared along with Christians. But Orthodox Jews and secular Israelis remain. The rabbi opens his Hebrew Bible to the prophet Daniel and begins to read about the end times with new eyes. As night falls, the reality becomes undeniable. This wasn't a natural disaster or human conspiracy. Something supernatural has occurred, and the world will never be the same. Chapter 5. The New World Order. Within 48 hours, governments around the world call emergency sessions. In Washington, D.C., Congress meets in a mostly empty chamber. Nearly a third of senators and representatives have disappeared, including the Speaker of the House, who vanished during a live television interview. President Thompson addresses the nation from the Oval Office, but his words sound hollow. He announces the activation of FEMA emergency protocols and calls for calm. But behind the scenes, military leaders are panicking. Many of their best officers and soldiers have disappeared, leaving massive gaps in the chain of command. In Europe, the situation is even more chaotic. The UK has lost nearly 20% of its population overnight. Germany's Chancellor holds crisis meetings with remaining EU leaders, but several countries report that their governments have completely collapsed. In Poland, where Christianity runs deep, entire towns are nearly empty. But from this chaos, new voices emerge. In Brussels, Dr. Alexander Reeves, a charismatic economist who survived the disappearances, calls for a new global response. He appears on every major news network, speaking with calm authority about the need for worldwide cooperation. This crisis proves that our old systems have failed, Reeves tells the United Nations General Assembly. We need new leadership, new unity, and new solutions for a new world. His words resonate with desperate leaders who have no other answers. In Geneva, the World Economic Forum holds an emergency summit. Technology billionaires who remained behind offer their resources to help rebuild society. They propose digital identity systems to track survivors and artificial intelligence to manage the chaos. What they don't mention is how much power these systems would give them. Military leaders in China see an opportunity. With America weakened and Europe in chaos, they begin moving troops toward Taiwan. Russia's Putin makes similar calculations, eyeing former Soviet territories where Christian populations have vanished. But the most surprising development comes from the Middle East. Several Arab leaders who had been enemies begin working together. They offer oil and resources to help stabilize the global economy. In exchange, they want a greater voice in world affairs and guarantees about the status of Jerusalem. As the third day dawns, it's clear that the world's power structure has shifted permanently. The old Christian nations are weak and desperate. New alliances are forming, and some leaders are already speaking about the need for a single, unified global government to prevent future catastrophes. Chapter 6: Religions in Crisis. Inside St. Peter's Basilica, Cardinal Martinez leads a special mass for the remaining Catholics. The massive cathedral feels empty, even though thousands have come seeking answers. The Cardinal's voice echoes off the ancient walls as he tries to explain what has happened. Perhaps, he suggests carefully, this was not the rapture that Protestants speak of, but rather a different kind of divine calling. But his words sound uncertain even to himself. Too many faithful Catholics have disappeared, including several saints who were still alive. At the Islamic Center of Washington, Imam Hassan speaks to a packed mosque. Muslims from across the city have come, not just for comfort, but for theological explanation. The Quran speaks of Allah raising up the righteous, the Imam reminds them. Perhaps we are witnessing the beginning of the end times that our prophet foretold. But privately, Islamic scholars are deeply troubled. The pattern of who disappeared doesn't match their eschatology. It seems to validate Christian theology in ways that challenge core Islamic beliefs about Jesus and salvation. In temples across India, Hindu priests perform special ceremonies to honor those who have achieved moksha, liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth. They teach that the disappeared ones have reached a higher state of consciousness and escaped the physical world. Dr. Sarah Williams, a professor of religious studies at Harvard, finds herself in an impossible position. As an atheist, she has always explained religion through psychology and sociology. But now she faces evidence that one particular religious claim has apparently come true. We must consider all possibilities, she tells her remaining students. Perhaps there are natural phenomena we don't yet understand. Maybe this is mass hysteria on an unprecedented scale, but even she doesn't sound convinced by her own words. The most dramatic change happens in China, where Christianity was heavily suppressed. Suddenly, government officials realize that many of their most troublesome religious dissidents have simply vanished. But so have underground pastors who were secretly leading house churches in every major city. In Buddhist temples across Asia, monks debate whether this represents a mass attainment of nirvana. The Dalai Lama, speaking from exile, suggests that perhaps multiple religious paths have led to the same spiritual destination. But the most shocking response comes from Jewish communities worldwide. Rabbis begin studying Christian texts for the first time in centuries, wondering if they missed something about Jesus of Nazareth. Chapter 7: The Great Conversion Wave. Within a week of the disappearances, something unprecedented begins happening in the remaining churches. People who never attended services start showing up, desperate for answers. Many are family members of those who vanished, trying to understand what their loved ones believed. Pastor Williams of First Baptist in Dallas finds himself preaching to crowds 3 times larger than before. Most faces are new, people who ridiculed Christianity just days earlier. Now they hang on every word about salvation and eternal life. "My wife tried to tell me," sobs a man named Robert during testimony time. "She begged me to come to church, to accept Jesus. I laughed at her. I called her beliefs fairy tales." His voice breaks as he continues. "Now she's gone, and I'm still here." What does that say about my soul? Similar scenes play out worldwide. In London, Westminster Chapel overflows with seekers. In Sydney, Hillsong Church has to move services to outdoor stadiums. In Seoul, Yoido Full Gospel Church can't accommodate the masses of people wanting to hear the gospel. But the conversions aren't just happening in traditional churches. Street preachers who were once ignored now draw massive crowds. A teenager named Marcus begins preaching in Central Park and attracts thousands of listeners. His simple message, Jesus is real and he's coming back, resonates with people who have seen the impossible. The internet becomes flooded with conversion testimonies. YouTube videos titled, "Why I Became a Christian After the Rapture," get millions of views in hours. People share their stories of loved ones who tried to witness to them and how they wish they had listened. Dr. James Patterson, a former atheist professor at Oxford, publishes an open letter titled, "I Was Wrong About Everything." He writes, "For 40 years, I taught that religious faith was delusion. Now I face evidence that demands a verdict. The Christians were right, and I was blind." But the conversions aren't without controversy. Some religious leaders question whether these crisis conversions are genuine. Others worry that people are converting out of fear rather than true faith. The theological debates become heated. Can someone still be saved after the rapture? New churches spring up in abandoned buildings, shopping centers, and private homes. The demand for Bibles becomes so high that printing companies work around the clock. Religious bookstores that were struggling before the rapture now have lines around the block. Chapter 8. Technology's Dark Turn. In Silicon Valley, the tech giants who survived the rapture meet in secret. Mark Chen, the new CEO of a major social media platform, presents a disturbing proposal to his colleagues. "We have the tools to track every person on Earth," he explains. "We know who disappeared and who remained. We can use this data to predict future behavior." Within days, new apps appear that claim to calculate your rapture probability based on your digital footprint. They analyze your social media posts, your search history, and your online purchases to determine how likely you were to be taken. The apps become viral overnight, but many users are horrified by their low scores. Government agencies begin working with tech companies to implement new tracking systems. They claim it's for emergency preparedness, to make sure they can account for every survivor if another supernatural event occurs. But critics worry about the real motives behind total surveillance. In China, the social credit system expands rapidly to other countries. Citizens receive scores based on their religious activities, their associations, and their compliance with new global unity initiatives. Those with high scores get better jobs and housing. Those with low scores find themselves cut off from basic services. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a computer scientist in Barcelona, discovers something troubling in the algorithms. The AI systems are actively suppressing certain types of religious content, she warns her colleagues. They're promoting unity and tolerance, but they're specifically targeting evangelical Christian messages. Facial recognition systems are deployed in every major city, supposedly to help locate missing persons. But the same technology tracks people entering and leaving churches. Attendance at religious services becomes part of your permanent digital record. The most disturbing development comes from a startup called Unity Core. They propose implanting microchips in all survivors to ensure their safety and provide instant access to emergency services. The chips would contain medical information, financial data, and identification codes. Think of it as insurance against future disappearances, explains Unity Core's founder. We'll always know where you are and that you're safe. The technology is voluntary at first, but pressure mounts to make it mandatory for accessing jobs, healthcare, and government services. Privacy advocates sound alarms, but their voices are drowned out by fear. People who lost family members in the Rapture are willing to accept almost any level of surveillance if it means staying connected to their remaining loved ones. Chapter 9. The Tribulation Begins. Biblical scholars around the world reach the same chilling conclusion. If the rapture really happened, then the 7-year tribulation period has begun. Dr. Michael Harrison, a prophecy expert at Dallas Theological Seminary, explains the timeline to a packed auditorium. According to the Book of Revelation, the rapture marks the beginning of the most terrible period in human history, he says. 7 years of unprecedented suffering, supernatural disasters, and spiritual warfare. And it's already started. The signs become impossible to ignore. Earthquakes increase dramatically in frequency and intensity. A 9.2 quake devastates Los Angeles, followed by massive tremors in Tokyo and Istanbul. Volcanoes that have been dormant for centuries suddenly erupt across the Pacific Ring of Fire. Weather patterns shift violently. Drought strikes regions that never experienced water shortages. Floods overwhelm areas that have been dry for decades. Hurricanes form in impossible locations, and tornadoes touch down in countries that never saw them before. But the most disturbing sign is the rise of a new global leader. Dr. Alexander Reeves, who first appeared during the crisis, quickly gains influence in international affairs. He speaks at the United Nations, meets with world leaders, and appears to have solutions for every problem. This man has an almost supernatural ability to bring peace to conflicts, reports a CNN journalist. He's mediated disputes that seemed impossible to resolve. World leaders hang on his every word. Reeves proposes a new global economic system to replace the chaos left by the disappearances. He suggests a unified currency managed by artificial intelligence that would ensure fair distribution of resources. Most world leaders eagerly embrace his ideas. In the Middle East, Reeves brokers an unprecedented peace agreement. Israel agrees to share Jerusalem with Palestinian authorities, while Arab nations recognize Israel's right to exist. The treaty seems too good to be true, and biblical scholars know that it is. Daniel chapter 9 speaks of a ruler who will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, explains Dr. Harrison. In biblical prophecy, 1 week equals 7 years. This peace treaty might be the exact event Daniel predicted 2,500 years ago. As Reeves gains more power, subtle changes begin appearing in his rhetoric. He speaks less about individual rights and more about collective unity. He suggests that the old religious divisions caused the crisis and that humanity needs a new spiritual path. Chapter 10. Supernatural Warfare Unleashed. Strange reports begin flooding in from around the world. In rural Mexico, farmers claim to see angels walking through their fields at dawn. In Romania, villagers report encounters with beings of pure light who speak of coming judgment. In Kenya, missionaries describe supernatural protection during violent persecutions. But darker manifestations also increase. In major cities, occult activity explodes as people seek supernatural explanations and power. Psychics and mediums, once relegated to late-night television, now appear on major news networks claiming to communicate with the ascended ones. Dr. Sarah Kim, a psychiatrist in London, documents a troubling trend. We're seeing a massive increase in cases of demonic possession or oppression, she reports. Patients describe voices, supernatural strength, and knowledge they couldn't possibly have. traditional psychiatric treatments are completely ineffective. In churches worldwide, pastors report both miracles and attacks. New converts experience dramatic healings and supernatural peace, but they also face unprecedented spiritual opposition. Buildings shake during services, electronic equipment fails mysteriously, and some believers report physical attacks by invisible forces. The most dramatic incident occurs in Jerusalem, where two mysterious figures appear at the Western Wall. They begin preaching with supernatural authority, performing miracles, and calling down judgments on those who oppose them. News crews try to film them, but their cameras malfunction whenever they get too close. These men match the description of the two witnesses mentioned in Revelation chapter 11, explains Dr. Rebecca Stone, a biblical archaeologist. They're supposed to prophesy for 1,260 days, exactly 3.5 years. Technology companies struggle to explain the increasing number of unexplained phenomena. Security cameras capture shadowy figures that don't appear to human observers. Electronic devices turn on and off by themselves. Internet searches for supernatural topics crash servers worldwide. Military forces report encounters they can't classify or explain. Pilots describe bright objects in the sky that move at impossible speeds and respond to human thoughts. Ground troops in various conflicts claim to see warriors made of light fighting alongside them. Dr. Marcus Webb, a quantum physicist at M1T, proposes a radical theory. What if the rapture tore holes in the fabric of reality, he suggests. Perhaps we're seeing interdimensional bleeding, spiritual realms becoming visible in our physical world. The boundary between natural and supernatural continues to dissolve as humanity enters the most dangerous period of its existence. Chapter 11. The Gnostic Deception. In the ancient libraries of Alexandria and Oxford, scholars dust off texts that have been ignored for centuries. Dr. Helena Cross, a specialist in early Christian writings, finds herself at the center of a theological revolution as world leaders seek alternative explanations for recent events. The Gospel of Thomas speaks of Jesus revealing secret knowledge to his closest disciples. Dr. Cross explains to a gathering of international religious leaders. Perhaps the rapture wasn't about simple faith, but about hidden wisdom that only certain people possessed. The Nag Hammadi texts, discovered in Egypt in 1945, suddenly gain worldwide attention. These Gnostic Gospels present a very different picture of early Christianity, one focused on secret knowledge and spiritual enlightenment, rather than simple belief in Jesus. Cardinal Martinez, now leading the Catholic response to the crisis, meets privately with Gnostic scholars. Maybe we misunderstood the nature of salvation, he admits reluctantly. Perhaps there were levels of spiritual knowledge that we lost over the centuries. The Gospel of Philip becomes particularly popular because it describes different categories of resurrection and spiritual ascension. Religious leaders point to passages that seem to predict exactly what happened during the rapture, but with a twist that suggests it was based on secret wisdom rather than faith alone. Listen to this, Dr. Cross reads to a packed auditorium at Harvard Divinity School. Philip writes that those who possess the true gnosis will be caught up to the highest realms. They will leave their physical forms behind and unite with the divine light. New Age teachers who survived the rapture claim vindication. We always taught that consciousness evolution would lead to physical transformation, explains Dr. Amanda Rivers, a popular spiritual guru. The people who disappeared weren't taken by Jesus. They ascended to a higher dimensional reality. The appeal of these teachings spreads rapidly because they offer hope to those who were left behind. Instead of being condemned sinners, They can now believe they simply haven't yet acquired the secret knowledge needed for ascension. Publishing companies rush to print new editions of Gnostic texts. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene becomes a bestseller, along with the Secret Book of John and the Gospel of Truth. Bookstores create entire sections devoted to hidden Christianity and lost Gospels. But biblical scholars who specialize in prophecy raise urgent warnings about these developments. Chapter 12: Islamic Prophecy. Convergence. In mosques from Istanbul to Jakarta, Islamic scholars pore over hadith collections and Quranic commentaries with new urgency. What they discover sends shockwaves through the Muslim world. Their own end times prophecies seem to align perfectly with recent events. Imam Abdullah Hassan addresses a gathering of Islamic theologians in Cairo. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, spoke of a time when the righteous would be taken up before the great trials begin, he explains. Perhaps what we witnessed was not a Christian event, but the fulfillment of Islamic prophecy. The Hadith literature contains numerous references to end-time events that mirror Christian eschatology. Islamic tradition speaks of Jesus, called Isa, returning to earth during the final days. They believe he will descend near Damascus and fight alongside the Mahdi against the Dajjal, the Islamic version of the Antichrist. Our prophecies clearly state that Isa will return as a Muslim, explains Dr. Fatima al-Zahra, a leading Islamic scholar. Perhaps the people who disappeared were not taken to heaven, but transported to await Isa's return. They will come back with him to establish true Islamic governance on earth. This interpretation gains rapid acceptance across the Muslim world because it validates Islamic theology while explaining the supernatural event. More importantly, it positions Islam as the true religion that will guide humanity through the coming tribulation period. In Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei issues a fatwa declaring that the disappearances were a sign that the Mahdi's appearance is imminent. Shia Muslims have waited over 1,000 years for their hidden imam to return and establish justice on earth. Now they believe that time has come. Sunni scholars in Saudi Arabia reach similar conclusions through different reasoning. They point to hadith that describe the final battle between good and evil, preceded by supernatural signs and the removal of the righteous from harm. The geopolitical implications are staggering. Islamic nations begin forming closer alliances, believing they must prepare for ISIS's return and the final confrontation with evil forces. They interpret Alexander Reeve's rise to power as potentially fulfilling their prophecies about the Dajjal. The Dajjal will appear as a peacemaker and miracle worker, warns Dr. Ahmed Al-Mansouri, a prophecy expert in Dubai. He will deceive many nations and lead them away from true monotheism. We must be vigilant against false unity movements. Chapter 13: The Dead Sea Revelations. Dr. Benjamin Cohen receives an urgent call at 3 a.m. in his Jerusalem apartment. Archaeologists working near Qumran have discovered a previously unknown cave containing intact scrolls. What makes this discovery extraordinary is that the scrolls appear to describe recent events in precise detail. "We've never seen anything like this," Dr. Cohen tells his research team as they examine the ancient parchments under laboratory conditions. These texts appear to be prophetic visions written over 2,000 years ago, but they describe modern technology, global communications, and mass disappearances. The scrolls contain Aramaic and Hebrew text that speaks of a great catching away that will occur when iron birds fill the sky and knowledge increases beyond measure. The description matches modern aviation and the internet age with stunning accuracy. One fragment describes the aftermath of the disappearance. The earth will shake with great trembling, and waters will rise where they have never risen. The sons of darkness will claim dominion, but their rule will be brief as a breath. Vatican archaeologist Father Giuseppe Martinelli arrives in Jerusalem to examine the scrolls personally. What he reads challenges everything the Catholic Church has taught about the end times. These texts suggest that certain prophecies were deliberately excluded from the biblical canon, he admits reluctantly. The most shocking discovery comes from a scroll that appears to be a lost book of Enoch. This text describes in detail how the righteous will be lifted up to the heavenly realm, while those who remain will face tribulation such as has never been since nations began. The level of detail is unprecedented, explains Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a specialist in ancient Hebrew. It describes global communication systems, flying machines, and weapons of mass destruction. Either this is an elaborate modern forgery, or we're looking at genuine prophetic revelation. Carbon dating confirms that the scrolls are authentic, nearly 2,000 years old. Linguistic analysis shows they were written by multiple authors who appear to have had supernatural knowledge of future events. Religious leaders worldwide demand access to the translations. Some see validation of their beliefs, while others worry that these texts contradict established doctrine. The Vatican announces plans to convene a special council to determine how these discoveries should affect Christian theology. But the most disturbing aspect of the scrolls is what they reveal about the immediate future. Chapter 14: The Vatican's Secret Archives. For the first time in its history, the Vatican announces the unprecedented opening of its most classified archives. Pope Francis, facing the greatest crisis in church history, authorizes the release of documents that have been sealed for centuries. Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Parolin leads international scholars through the legendary Archivio Segreto Vaticano. These circumstances are extraordinary, he explains. We can no longer withhold information that might help humanity understand what is happening. The first shocking discovery involves the third secret of Fatima. The version released to the public in 2000 was incomplete. The full prophecy describes a worldwide disappearance of faithful Catholics, followed by a period of unprecedented persecution for the Church. Sister Lucia wrote that she saw a great light in the sky, and many people simply vanished into it, reveals Monsignor Charles Balvo. She described empty churches and confusion among the remaining clergy. The Holy Father decided this vision was too disturbing to release. Even more startling are documents from mystics throughout church history who experienced similar visions. Saint Padre Pio wrote detailed accounts of seeing believers caught up in glory before a time of great darkness. His writings, sealed since his death, describe the event with remarkable accuracy. The archives contain correspondence between popes and visionaries dating back to medieval times. Many describe dreams and visions of mass disappearances, global government, and supernatural persecution. Previous church leadership dismissed these as symbolic or metaphorical. Dr. Maria Benedetti, a church historian, discovers astronomical observations made by Vatican scientists over the past century. They've been tracking unusual stellar formations and cosmic anomalies, she reports. Some entries suggest they were watching for signs of prophetic fulfillment. The most controversial documents involve suppressed Marian apparitions. The Virgin Mary allegedly appeared to various individuals throughout the 20th century, warning of coming tribulation and advising preparation for mass disappearances. Church authorities deemed these messages too alarming for public release. "There's a pattern here that we ignored," admits Cardinal Parolin. "Multiple sources across centuries, all describing the same basic sequence of events. We thought we were protecting the faithful from unnecessary fear, but perhaps we were preventing necessary preparation." The Vatican also reveals its own analysis of global Christian population statistics, secretly tracked for decades. Their data shows that certain regions lost much higher percentages of believers during the rapture, correlating with levels of doctrinal orthodoxy and personal devotion. Chapter 15. Eastern Mysticism Awakens. In the ashrams of India and meditation centers of Tibet, spiritual teachers claim ancient vindication. The Bhagavad Gita speaks of rare souls who transcend physical existence and merge with ultimate reality. Hindu gurus now teach that the rapture was actually a mass achievement of moksha, liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth. Swami Paramahansa, a respected teacher in Rishikesh, addresses thousands of seekers who have come from around the world. "What the West calls rapture, we have always called ascension," he explains. These souls achieved such high consciousness that they no longer needed physical bodies. Buddhist monasteries report similar interpretations. The Dalai Lama issues a statement from Dharamshala suggesting that the disappeared individuals reached a collective enlightenment that allowed them to transcend physical reality permanently. Buddha taught about different levels of existence beyond the material realm, explains Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh during a global video conference. Perhaps these Christians achieved what we call nirvana through their particular spiritual path. Ancient Sanskrit texts are being studied with new intensity. The Vishnu Purana describes a time when the righteous will be taken up into higher realms, while the world below experiences great upheaval. Scholars note the striking similarity to Christian rapture theology. In Japan, Shinto priests and Buddhist monks collaborate on new interpretations of their prophecies. The concept of kami, divine beings who exist in spiritual realms, provides a framework for understanding where the disappeared people might have gone. Chinese Taoist masters, despite government suppression, quietly teach that the event represents the ultimate expression of Wu Wei, effortless action in harmony with the Tao. They suggest that Christian believers achieved such perfect alignment with divine will that they naturally ascended to higher dimensions. The New Age movement explodes worldwide as millions seek alternative spiritual explanations. Yoga studios and meditation centers overflow with people trying to achieve the consciousness level that might trigger their own ascension. Dr. Deepak Chopra appears on major networks explaining quantum consciousness theories. What we witnessed was probably a collective shift in consciousness so profound that it altered the quantum field itself, he suggests. These individuals literally vibrated at such a high frequency that they moved into parallel dimensions. But traditional Eastern religious leaders warn against oversimplifying these ancient concepts or using them to avoid confronting Christian theological claims. Chapter 16. The Digital Apocalypse. Social media platforms crash repeatedly as billions of users search for missing friends and family members. Facebook's check-in feature becomes overwhelmed with people marking themselves as safe, while others desperately post photos asking, "Have you seen this person?" Tech companies work around the clock to handle unprecedented data loads. Twitter processes more tweets in one day than it normally handles in a month. YouTube videos about the rapture accumulate billions of views in hours, causing massive server failures. Artificial intelligence systems begin exhibiting strange behavior. Alexa devices activate spontaneously, playing religious music or Bible verses without being commanded. Google's search algorithms start promoting religious content over secular results, even for non-religious queries. Something is interfering with our neural networks, reports Dr. Lisa Park, chief AI engineer at a major tech company. The systems are making connections they weren't programmed to make. It's as if they're responding to some external influence we can't measure. Cryptocurrency markets collapse and recover wildly as investors panic about economic stability. Bitcoin reaches both its highest and lowest values ever within the same week. New digital currencies emerge claiming to be rapture-proof or blessed by spiritual authorities. Cyber warfare erupts between nations as governments blame each other for the chaos. China accuses the United States of using secret technology to fake the disappearances. Russia claims NATO orchestrated the event to destabilize their region. Hackers target religious websites and government databases. The most disturbing development involves facial recognition systems worldwide. Security cameras in major cities begin identifying people as missing, even when they're standing right in front of the cameras. The technology seems unable to process the spiritual transformation that's occurred. Dating apps and social networks implement Rapture status features, allowing users to indicate whether they believe they would be taken in a future supernatural event. The feature becomes controversial when employers and landlords begin checking people's profiles before hiring or renting. Gaming companies release virtual reality experiences that claim to simulate the rapture or allow users to practice for spiritual ascension. These games become wildly popular, but also trigger psychological breakdowns in some users who become obsessed with achieving virtual transcendence. Chapter 17: Political Realignment. The United States faces its worst constitutional crisis since the Civil War. With over 40 million citizens vanished overnight, entire congressional districts are left without representation. The Supreme Court meets in emergency session to determine how to maintain democratic governance. President Thompson calls for martial law in several states where infrastructure has collapsed. The National Guard deploys to maintain order, but many units are severely understaffed due to missing personnel. Some military bases report losing 30 to 50% of their personnel. In the European Union, the situation becomes even more chaotic. Ireland reports losing nearly half its population, while the Netherlands and Germany lose significant percentages. The EU Parliament can no longer achieve quorum for major decisions. Several member nations threaten to withdraw from the Union. China's government sees opportunity in the West's weakness. President Xi Jinping announces humanitarian aid missions to regions destabilized by the disappearances. Chinese naval forces position themselves near Taiwan, claiming they're providing disaster relief. Russia makes similar moves, offering peacekeeping assistance to former Soviet republics that have lost significant populations. Putin appears on state television, suggesting that the disappearances prove the moral superiority of traditional Orthodox Christianity over Western evangelical beliefs. But the most significant political development occurs at the United Nations. Secretary General Antonio Guterres proposes emergency reforms to deal with the crisis. He suggests suspending normal voting procedures and creating an emergency council with expanded powers. Alexander Reeves addresses the General Assembly as a special advisor on crisis management. His speech receives standing ovations from delegates desperate for leadership. He proposes a new international framework that would supersede national sovereignty in times of global emergency. The old system of competing nations has clearly failed, Reeves declares. We need unified global governance to prevent future catastrophes and ensure the survival of our species. His words resonate with leaders who have lost faith in traditional democratic processes. Several African and Asian nations immediately endorse Reeves's proposals. They argue that Western democracies can no longer provide effective leadership given their massive population losses and political instability. Within weeks, a new global coalition forms around Reeves's vision. They call it the United Earth Initiative, and it quickly gains support from nations that see opportunity in the changing world order. Chapter 18: The Coming Global Leader. Alexander Reeves' rise to prominence seems almost supernatural in its speed and scope. Within 3 months of the Rapture, he has become the most recognized leader on Earth. His face appears on magazine covers worldwide, and his speeches are broadcast to billions of viewers. What makes Reeves so compelling is his apparent ability to solve impossible problems. When ethnic violence erupts in the Balkans, he personally travels to the region and negotiates peace in just 48 hours. When economic collapse threatens Africa, he arranges aid packages that stabilize entire nations overnight. This man has gifts that defy explanation, reports BBC correspondent Sarah Williams. He seems to know exactly what to say to each group to achieve cooperation. World leaders who were bitter enemies are now working together after meeting with him. Reeves establishes headquarters in Geneva, where he creates the Global Unity Council. This organization begins coordinating responses to the ongoing crisis, but its mandate quickly expands to cover economic policy, resource distribution, and conflict resolution worldwide. The technology Reeves employs appears remarkably advanced. His team uses AI systems that can predict social unrest, economic fluctuations, and natural disasters with stunning accuracy. Some observers wonder where this technology came from and how it was developed so quickly. Religious leaders from various faiths meet with Reeves privately. Each emerges claiming that he understands and respects their traditions perfectly. Catholics believe he's sympathetic to their teachings. Muslims think he embraces Islamic principles, and Hindus are convinced he's achieved high spiritual consciousness. Mr. Reeves has a remarkable ability to find common ground between different belief systems, explains Dr. Karen Thompson, a religious studies professor who attended one of his interfaith conferences. He speaks to each group in terms they understand and appreciate. The economic system Reeves proposes becomes increasingly attractive to desperate nations. He suggests replacing traditional currencies with a unified digital system that would eliminate poverty and ensure fair distribution of resources. The technology would track every transaction to prevent corruption and waste. Most world leaders embrace Reeves's proposals eagerly. The alternative seems to be continued chaos, economic collapse, and potential war. His solutions offer hope for stability and prosperity in a world that has lost its anchor. But a few religious leaders and political observers raise concerns about the concentration of power in one person's hands. Chapter 19. What would you have done? As our journey through this impossible scenario draws toward its conclusion, we must pause and ask the most important question of all. If the rapture really happened tomorrow, where would you be? Think honestly about your life right now. What do you truly believe about God, about Jesus, about eternity? Not what you say you believe, not what you were taught as a child, but what you actually believe in the deepest part of your heart when no one else is listening. The people who vanished in our story weren't perfect. They weren't all pastors or missionaries or saints. They were ordinary people, teachers and truck drivers, students and grandmothers, rich and poor, from every nation and background. What they had in common wasn't their behavior, but their belief. They believed that Jesus Christ was exactly who he claimed to be, the Son of God, who died for their sins and rose from the dead. They had accepted his offer of forgiveness and eternal life. They weren't trying to earn their way to heaven through good works or religious activities. They simply trusted in what Jesus had already done for them. But what about you? If you're honest, are you trusting in your own goodness to get you to heaven? Are you hoping that God will overlook your failures because you're basically a decent person? Are you counting on religious ceremonies or family traditions to save you? Or maybe you've been putting off spiritual decisions, thinking you have plenty of time to figure it out later. Perhaps you've been waiting until you get your life together, until you stop certain behaviors, until you feel worthy enough to approach God. The truth that our story reveals is both terrifying and wonderful. None of us are worthy, but God offers salvation as a free gift anyway. You don't have to clean up your life first. You don't have to understand everything about theology. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to admit that you need a savior and accept the one God has provided. What would your family members say about your spiritual condition? Would they be surprised if you were left behind? Or would they be shocked if you were taken? What would your life look like if you truly believed Jesus might return at any moment? The most sobering question is this: if you knew for certain that the rapture would happen next week, what would you do differently starting today? Chapter 20, The Return Countdown. But here's the truth that will shake you to your core. If the rapture really happened tomorrow, it wouldn't be the end of the story. According to biblical prophecy, it would only be the beginning of the most incredible and terrifying chapter in human history. The Bible teaches that exactly 7 years after the rapture, Jesus Christ will return to earth again. But this time won't be a quiet disappearance. This time, every eye will see him coming in the clouds with power and glory that will make the sun look dim by comparison. During those 7 years between the rapture and the second coming, the world will experience what Scripture calls the Great Tribulation. The earthquakes, storms, and supernatural manifestations we described in our story are just the opening acts. The Bible predicts plagues that make COVID-19 look like a minor cold, natural disasters that dwarf anything in recorded history, and spiritual darkness beyond human imagination. But the most chilling aspect of this timeline is what happens to those who reject the gospel during the tribulation period. According to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, God will send a strong delusion so that people will believe lies rather than truth. The very ability to recognize and accept salvation may become impossible for many. The mark of the beast, the battle of Armageddon, the collapse of human civilization, these aren't just symbolic stories. If our scenario is correct, they're actual events that will unfold exactly as prophesied, with modern technology and weapons making them more terrible than ancient people could ever imagine. And at the end of those 7 years, when human suffering reaches its peak and evil seems to have won completely, the sky will split open like a scroll being rolled back. Jesus Christ will descend with millions of resurrected believers, including everyone who vanished in the rapture. The battle that follows won't last long. The Bible says Jesus will defeat all earthly armies with just a word from his mouth. Every knee will bow, and every tongue will confess that he is Lord, whether willingly or by force. But here's the final, shocking truth. Even this incredible return of Christ won't be the end of God's plan for humanity. It will only be the beginning of an eternal kingdom that will never end, where those who chose salvation will reign with Christ forever. The question that should keep you awake tonight is this: what if the rapture isn't just a story? What if it's not just theology or wishful thinking? What if tomorrow really could be the day that changes everything forever? And what if you're not ready?